Welcome back to the arena. This is part 2 of our conversation with Lang Martin, and we're kind of building on the stuff we talked about in the first section. So hopefully it continues to be informative and interesting. Okay, what about anything else that you're just interested in right now that would be fun to highlight? You drove up on a motorcycle. Yeah. I thought that was cool. But yeah, any other like projects or trends or things that you're interested in?
I don't know. I think I think that like the sort of the thing about like the kind of ownership of businesses and where stuff goes, a really interesting part of that is at the end of Subspace, my like stand up was with these two guys, and one of them was in Croatia and the other one was in Brazil, right?
Wow.
And so we kind of hung out every morning and stuff, but when Subspace broke up, they both got jobs at like pretty close to what I got. And so like whatever that factor is in Chattanooga is more extreme in Sao Paulo, right? Because you got like the strength of the dollar working against you and stuff. I think that's super interesting. I think we're like on the cusp of some really interesting pressure on global politics when you have a whole sort of slice of people who can suddenly make, $170,000 US or whatever living in Brazil. And it's like, not only have US companies been relying on cheap labor that's getting less cheap because they're all trying to get the same pool, but it's the sort of idea of like California basically owning everybody kind of starts to rear its head.
Yeah.
In terms of like Brazil might turn into a remote working place instead of a native tech environment, and then you get that kind of like that kind of colonial economy where like sure there's jobs, but the ownership wealth is leaving, and it's not,
and that matters.
It matters hugely.
It's that like neocolonialism, like it's the impact's kind of, or it looks more invisible, but it's pulling a lot of money and focus away from the local scene.
Yeah,
that's fascinating. I've heard Colombia, I've heard several Eastern European countries, Romania, Ukraine traditionally, Brazil, Argentina. It's the nearshoring thing, and then just offshoring seems like it's definitely trending, and especially in this interim where the U.S. salaries and inflation rate has been so high, and the level of entitlement of candidates has been like
super
all-time high.
It's baseline high too.
Yeah. Man, I feel like we're gonna have to do more episodes because I got so many things, so many other fun things to ask you.
Yeah.
Any advice for recruiters? Because I imagine some people are curious about how to talk to someone like you, for how to intro those conversations. What information caught your eye about Subspace or HashiCorp that made you want to lean into the interview process?
I think the biggest thing that like everyone who's wired like me is like just say all of the things up front. Like the immediate like I'm not willing to have this conversation is like all the people who text about trying to buy my house. Sort of like, hey Maurice, is this you or whatever? And it's like no, like I mean just start with, hey, I'd like to buy your house.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that you want to sell it for $90,000 or whatever, and then I can just be like, no, I don't, and then we're done. And I think just like that level of like respect for my time by sort of taking the time to put like, you can do like top of the fold, bottom of the fold or whatever, but just like, and I think this is like, I think lots of people have said this, like, just like tell me what the salary range is. Tell me what the title stuff looks like. Just kind of like front load all of the stuff and make it more of what it's supposed to be, like, or like what it kind of claims to be, of like, I'm letting you know about an opportunity instead of like selling you on an opportunity.
More informative than salesy. Yeah, and I think that's a trend in books too, right? Like more people are front loading the core thesis and advice in the first, third of the book, and then the back half will be stories. Because traditionally there's like, we need to like tell all these stories to build the case, and I think that's probably a good thing for recruiting. Like, I do think good stories are the most sticky as humans. It's what you remember, but you need that hook to know it's worth your time to listen to the story.
Yeah,
and I do think that's changed. Like,
I'm sure
there's more recruiters leading with, here's the job description, here's the company, here's the salary. Traditionally, it was like, you don't get any of that info.
Right.
Like, basically, let me try to say something semi-personalized or quippy enough to get you on the phone with me.
Yeah.
And I think even my wife was asking me about this for younger, younger millennials, Gen Z. She was like, do you feel like they just don't want to get on the phone? They'd prefer to text. And I was like, yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Phone calls, feel more intimidating for some reason.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I'm never sure what generation I'm in, because like I'm like pretty old, but I spend
elder millennial.
Yeah, but I like spend so much time on the internet.
Yeah.
That, like my son's trying to tell me about the memes. I'm like, no, you're using it wrong. Like, come on, man. Like,
that's great.
How
old is Milo?
He's 11.
11. Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I think the way that I find myself thinking about it is like the difference between getting information in a text and getting that same information from a phone call is that when I'm on the phone with a person, they have power to manipulate me if they're more charismatic than I am, and they have the power that I might forget what they said. And so it like
the burden's on you to take the notes.
I basically what I perceive is a power difference that if they'll just like tell me what they mean in text, it sort of goes away, and it doesn't matter if I'm like less charismatic or whatever.
That's interesting.
And I don't know if that's how like younger people are perceiving it, but that's how I feel about it. And I feel like my communication is influenced by all the same stuff that like Gen Z communication is influenced by. Like I use all the same tools.
I wonder, if that's kind of one of those EQ, IQ things. Where some recruiters and salespeople that have the charisma, they might not even have a higher EQ. They might, but maybe it's just more so an ability to communicate persuasively.
Right.
That, I don't like that either. When I get on and I feel that sense of like I'm being pushed down this funnel.
Yeah.
And I'm swimming upstream just to get out of it in the conversation. People don't like to feel sold, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, that's helpful. So lead with, be informative, be direct about your ask, and then hopefully be likable when you do get on a call, because that is...
Yeah, it matters a little bit. It definitely matters at some point.
I don't know of any recruiter or headhunter that doesn't have to get on some type of verbal call, whether phone call or video call or whatever, with the candidate to be able to actually submit them to the company. Like, that's part of the function that you verify that they can talk well.
Right.
Okay.
And that they're a real person and not like...
Real person. Yes. Not getting catfished.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's helpful. Would love to circle back to the question.
Actually, you know what? I bet even a follow-up would be like, if you like schedule the phone call and then just go ahead and tell them the reason that you're doing it is that the company wants you to do a sanity check before it goes through. It's like literally never occurred to me that that's why the phone call happens until right now.
1,000,000%.
And and sometimes I'm like, why do I have to talk to this person? I'm not going to work with them. Like, what are we doing? So I think just like that would be my whole umbrella for, I mean, it's like for anything basically, but like
power of the preface.
Especially for that. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's helpful. Because I think, we assume so much that people know what we're thinking or the reason, the why behind what we're doing, just as people. So I'm going to take that back to my team and let them know. Yeah, explaining that, over-explaining may be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. Circling back to your point about developing a remote culture that is dedicated to learning together. And being a team that develops together. Don't let me put words in your mouth, but I would love to hear you unpack that a little more.
Yeah. No, and actually it's like there's a little bit of a connection there too, I think.
Cool.
So I think like basically it was like Ben Marks asked me to come to Subspace, and one of the things he said was, I always found the community of people kind of from OpenTable, like the sort of Chattanooga like CS like zone. He's just super impressive people, and he's tried to hire several of them. But he's like, it's just like a really impressive community, and it seems like it gelled in like a really cool way. And he was like, basically like, I want you to try to do that at Subspace. And so I was like, okay, look, pump the brakes. Those guys are also awesome. I was there for sure, but I don't know that I actually did anything. So like, there's a little bit of mystery to it. But I think it started to happen again at Subspace. So I've been like sort of trying to unpack like at least what the part of that I contributed, because I think I did contribute a bit to kind of pulling that together. And so the remote thing, I think one of the big distinctions between, and we sort of briefly talked about this before we started, but the sort of distinction between like training and learning, and I think of it as kind of like, it's actually sort of almost like what liberal arts is about, is the idea of like slightly less disciplined learning, like with just like a slightly fuzzier kind of area that you're willing to study, is actually kind of where you get new ideas from. Like a whole bunch of creativity comes from just like setting the thing down and getting different inputs. And it's really like, at least, in the history of computer science, like the whole, the original notion of object-oriented code, which I will take the traditional academic position that nobody actually does it that way. And what we actually do is kind of worse. But the original notion of it was actually modeled very explicitly on cells, on biology. So there was like a kind of crossover inspiration from to kind of get these benefits that were like these biological benefits. And that's what the objects were. They weren't, philosophical objects, and they weren't like category theory objects or whatever. They were biological ones, and that was kind of how they informed it.
How did that happen? Like, was that a biologist and a computer scientist talking? Do you know?
I don't know. This is like Smalltalk era. So This is like Xerox PARC, and like, there's some super cool stuff written about it. I know the one thing that they did that was really cool is like the kind of modern computer interface was invented there, right before PARC was shut down. Xerox PARC was always kind of one of these like hallmarks of like, look, companies can do real research. It turns out the government paid for it all.
Interesting.
And when the government funding went away, Xerox was like, forget it. But when they were at PARC, they were basically tasked with like figuring out what a graphical interface could look like.
GUI.
Yeah. And
have you seen the Netflix Explain documentary on coding? I think they might touch on it. It's only like 20 minutes, but I thought it was an awesome overview, like flyby for the people that are not as good at reading those books.
Sure.
I think they mentioned some of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to mention PARC, because like Steve Jobs toured it, and like the original Macintosh is sort of suspiciously similar to the PARC. Like graphical interface. Unfortunately, the PARC stuff, the really, really cool part of it was not in there because Steve Jobs didn't get that part of it. So he kind of gave us the look of it. But the PARC system was like, it was actually a special key on the keyboard. And when you press the button, the window would flip around. And on the backside, the code was there.
No way.
And you could edit the code and flip it back around and begin running. And so their vision was like, you'd get like a really simple Macintosh. And instead of like waiting for someone to develop Photoshop with 86,000 buttons, you would actually edit the crappy, like the built-in paint thing until it had just the parts of Photoshop that you wanted. And people would like be sharing code and stuff. So they actually had a vision that was a lot more like, we're going to like teach people how to be programmers.
Wow. When was this?
In the 60s.
The 60s.
It's shocking. There's the brief history of PARC. There's like this crappy scanned PDF, which is like, as far as I know, the only copy of this like major milestone in computer history floating around. But yeah, it's 72, I think, was about when they pulled the plug on it.
Okay.
But in like 1968, they had like a laptop with a wireless network with a GUI running on it that was like programmable.
That's crazy. Yeah, I would have.
So
I thought you were
early.
about to say the 90s. I had no idea it was that early.
Yeah, so early. But they developed that like just with this kind of cross-pollination thing. I think 2 members of the park design team were Montessori kindergarten teachers. Right? Because they were like,
teachers have some brilliance.
Yeah.
I mean, we really, yeah.
But they were like, we want an environment where people are going to play around with stuff and learn.
Yep.
We should have not just the computer scientists, but we should have the people who have been thinking a lot about how to give people toys that teach them stuff.
And could that tie back to like Jordan Peterson's always talking about the unstructured play and how important it is for kids? I feel like that's kind of what you're getting at with adults too. Like,
Yeah.
some of the unstructured play as an adult, maybe that's more domain specific that your interest is in, but being able to have the overlap in those interests and figure that out is where a lot of the magic happens.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's
Google's
sort of
done that, right? Didn't they have like the 20% rule where you had to, I don't know if that's still a thing, but
I think it is still a thing. I think it's sort of, well, I've never worked there.
But that idea.
My understanding is that it can get a little kind of weird and political.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
But yeah, the unstructured play as an adult to explore how things are related in ways that we might not have expected. So tying that back, you think that's really important for teams to have a culture of ongoing learning and training? Distinguish training and learning again.
I think like training is like, like sometimes there'll be like a company learning channel or whatever, and the company learning channel will be full of like, here's another algorithm for like routing on a network. This is a subspace, right? Like, network switch thing, network whatever. And it was all like very focused. It was right on target, where it's like, I read an article that's like, directly related to what we're doing here. And so we're going to have maybe this kind of like conversation about it, or we'll have like a little Zoom call where someone reviews something, but it's like literally a product we might buy, or, it's all super focused, right? And shares a lot in common with the kind of training that would, like at Walmart, whatever, where they teach you the cash register system, where you don't care about the development of the person. You don't care about their creative output. You just want them to learn something that's like really focused. And I think engineers can kind of self-select that by wanting to be professional with each other. So, when I kind of rolled into Subspace, I think there was a little bit of a culture of kind of trying to do some of this stuff. But I think one of the things that I brought in, and also Joe brought in a lot of this stuff. He was the guy hired right after me from Arizona.
Okay.
But one of the things I sort of tried to contribute was just sort of like, on day one, not being afraid to be a little bit unprofessional and be like, dude, check out this like crazy, like, it was like a Zig compiler something where they'd done some crazy memory mapping, and just like something that's like genuinely cool that has nothing directly to do with what we're doing. But like it's pretty hooky for just sort of like getting people
sparking
engaged.
Conversation. Yeah.
And I think that's sort of like, that's what makes that kind of learning environment fun for me, is to have it be more eclectic and more kind of like, and it doesn't have to be right on the nose. And then a lot of times, like, I briefly mentioned I went to a Strange Loop talk that taught me how to build my thing. So, I was working on this kind of end user programmable spreadsheet relative kind of product. That has a lot of stuff that I kind of believe about, like what interfaces should be like, and and stuff that I've been thinking about for a long time. But the talk that actually got me over the hump of like figuring out how to implement it was about Miranda, which was this programming language that had a very weird compiler from the 80s that nobody uses anymore, right? So it's like a guy's talking about like how this compiler was built, which has superficially nothing to do with what I'm doing. But that was where I got like the essential kind of insight to like figure out how to build my like web app, basically, right?
Yeah, that's super cool.
And so I think that's something that I've leaned on a ton in my career, but I feel like what I saw, like especially with like Brandon was already a super good programmer when we joined the team, and he's I mean, he hasn't been working as long as I have because he's a lot younger than I am. He's like 11 or something.
What up, Brandon? Shout out.
I think he's actually like, I don't know, 20 something, I think still.
Wow.
Barely. But like, I feel like I sort of watched Brandon go from being like a super competent programmer into one that was like much more like, he just like deepened the whole time we were working together in a super cool way. And I think that was sort of, I think that was kind of part of an artifact of just being in this environment. I think also like when we hired Joe, like Joe was like just intimidatingly on it and like dumped all these papers and stuff and kind of became that like that lead person that you're chasing.
Yeah. The pace setter. Yeah.
And sort of like, I think kind of pulled everybody sort of forward in that direction. But it was really interesting to kind of watch that happen remotely. I think it was.
What platforms are you using then? You said you had a learning channel, but like, are you guys chatting on
like,
Slack?
Yeah, it's just Slack.
Like, okay. So that was that was the medium for communication. Then it was just about changing the strategy behind it. Like have the hook, have space for non-tactical conversations and tools.
Yeah.
I think this is the interesting thing about Covenant grads is there's such an emphasis on liberal arts and then interdisciplinary studies, everything being connected, that you and I might naturally think that way, but a lot of more research-driven universities don't. Yeah. And so,
Well, and I have a history degree, right?
You have a history degree.
So I sort of like started kind of like screwy on this anyway.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like a very liberal arts understanding of what makes people insightful. And I think what I've seen is like if you can just get the conversation rolling that direction, you get a lot more engagement because suddenly people are sort of like, oh, interesting. Actually, I'm also into ham radio. And now that I think about it, you know, like this sort of like oscilloscope thing that I was just thinking about is actually kind of has some interesting insight or is just cool for its own sake.
Yeah. That's given me some good food for thought for our team too. Cause we're trying to figure out some of that stuff. How do you build that culture where it's not just the founder, the leader that's driving, but like it's everyone pushing, and bringing things that they think are cool that will spark ideas outside of just here's the SOP that we get done.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, I haven't seen it turn into a distraction. I mean, I feel like surely someone out there is worried about like, oh, this is going to turn into just like, now we're just talking about random stuff.
But happy people are productive people, right? Like
that's
across the board. So if that can bring a level of happiness, it probably, even if it takes away an hour of the day, that remaining 7 hours is probably more productive.
That's the experience that I keep having. Like Subspace, I feel like we spent a lot of time kind of just like chatting about stuff and like being interested in all sorts of kind of crazy stuff and like trying different things. We also wrote a ton of code and a lot of it was really high quality and built like a really complex system with like 30 people in like a year.
That's amazing.
And it easily, like if you were going to back the napkin that system, you would never try to do it that way. You would have like more people and more time.
It's a big napkin.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to have to do more episodes.
Okay.
This was super fun.
Yeah, let's do it.
I really enjoy it. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
Sorry I didn't let you drink your whole coffee.
That's
Kept
right.
asking questions. Until next time, Lang.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Cool.